is it possible in a place like Michigan to build multiracial working class organizing infrastructure that can build proactive vision of the communities and state we deserve and contest for governing power to make that real? For us, the thing I think that is important to know, that I'm going to share a couple quick things before I wrap up, and we'll hear a little bit more of the more recent stories of the battle for democracy in Michigan. But there's a few things that I think are important that are not unique to Michigan, though they are acute. One is that in a place like Michigan, excuse my language, but people give a shit about us every 2 or 4 years because we're important in national elections. And so what ends up happening is that there might be a lot of money that flows in, or national organizations who become interested in our state. And what I was seeing over over a course of about a decade of organizing was that what was happening is we were building sandcastles. We were treating people like they were bodies and numbers and data points in the voter file, not as if they were humans and leaders and people capable of collective action, who could find their own agency and build collective agency with others. And that's a real problem because it leads to things like not having sufficient power in a place like Michigan to prevent things like the Flint water crisis and further attacks on our democracy. That's one, the challenge of mobilizing over organizing. There are not shortcuts in this work. If we care about democracy, we must care in investing in organizing in communities and treating people not like their bodies and numbers, but like their leaders and agents. And the second thing that I want to share as I start to wrap up my introduction is that when we look at a place like Michigan, Michigan is one of the most segregated places in the country. As a whole, we're about 75 to 80% white. Our largest city by far is the city of Detroit, which is about 90+% people of color, about 80% Black. When we have this level of segregation coupled with the level of economic devastation that we've seen in Detroit, Flint, Benton Harbor, Pontiac, but also vast rural parts of the state, we become fertile ground for a divide and conquer politics unless we are clear and willing to talk about race explicitly in our organizing work and build multiracial working class organizing power. We will not have the strength to face the challenges ahead of us. There's also incredibly important opportunities for grassroots organizations that are building power year-round around the issues that matter to them. If we want to be strong on voting rights, we have to be strong on voting rights in order to advance a proactive agenda. Our communities deeply care about voting, and they deeply care about voting in order to make sure that people hold office that care about our communities to advance our interests. So it's really important that we're fighting constantly on things that matter to multiracial working class communities.
And then in 2018, we saw something happen. We saw a moment coming out of the uprisings, coming out of the struggles, coming out of the pain that so many of us were feeling from the M4BL movement. So many of us were feeling rooted in our communities, being harassed, individuals being accosted, stopped by the police, just a number of horrible experiences and loss of life. We saw some hope. The sister ran for governor in Georgia in 2018, and everyone got excited because there was a Black woman running for governor. And so, of course, everybody was excited up and down the ballot for the cycle, for the candidates, for the work. And we started moving because there was a narrative about Black men that we were apathetic, or that we were lazy, or that we were disengaged. And all around me, there was this group of brothers who were passionate, who were critical thinkers, who were invested in the work, who were deeply committed to changing the narrative about who we were. And so we got together and decided that we were going to put up our own resource and volunteer our own time and fight to make sure that there was a progressive slate in office that would speak to our needs, because we understood that the hate mongering that we had seen, that the radicalization of militia groups that we had experienced was terrorizing us up and down the state. So Georgia has 159 counties. Each of those counties has an individual board of elections structure. And in order to win anything, you have to be able to coordinate the rural and urban vote in Georgia. So we dedicated ourselves to expanding our reach as far as we could and having impact in 5 critical areas. So criminal justice reform, education, Black mental health and wellness, economic enfranchisement, and civic engagement. And by doing that, we were able to communicate and activate a population of voters that were considered infrequent and low propensity. And most importantly, it gave us an opportunity to create a substantive change in our community. But we weren't done there. So once we saw what we were able to do with our civic engagement work, we ramped up our power with Black Male Initiative Fund this past year and decided that we had to do more than just register folks to vote. We had to identify, we had to develop, we had to nurture, and we had to cultivate the next generation of leaders that were going to hold offices up and down the ballot. So that's our mission now. We are identifying, developing, partnering, and running candidates up and down the ballot in Georgia for 22, doing everything we can to make sure that our voices are heard, that the folks closest to the need are closest to the support and the work. And with that, I'll say, we are excited to be here with you this evening, and we look forward to having a deeper, absolutely. So I am a firm believer that everything that I can get my hands on and use for the liberation of my people and myself, I'm gonna use. So yes, we absolutely want your dollars. We absolutely want you to fundraise. We absolutely want you to send every penny you can. Now, if you have some people that are able to come down and spend some time, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but what I will say is that having folks parachute into our communities, and if they don't really understand our communities, is less helpful. It's more important that we do the hard work of base building and creating organizational infrastructure so that when y'all folks finish your time on the ground with us and you go home, we're still able to duplicate those efforts and work, because it's our home, it's our community. It's super important that folks invest in those organizations on the ground. And I make a big pitch for smaller organizations. There are always going to be folks that fund big NGOs and the biggest, sexiest organizations in the state. I think you should. I'm not saying you shouldn't, but there is a certain value in funding smaller, grassroots, community-based organizations that don't get all the shine and energy that the large organizations get, but do as much work. They are doing God's work. Now, in addition to that, we need your prayers, we need your love, we need some helpful thoughts. You can send baked goods and cookies if you want to. You can do everything that is genuine and germane to what you're able to lift up. We also need you to have these conversations with your friends, with well-meaning white folks. We need you to do some terraforming of your own. Like, terraforming is a sci-fi term. It's really geeky. I'm letting you into me a little bit here. Basically, it means you're changing the ecosystem and the environment to make it so that you can sustain life for yourself. So what we need folks to do, we need non-BIPOC, non-Black, Indigenous, and people of color folks to figure out how to talk to white folks and terraform this ecosystem so that it's safer for us to exist. Challenge the preconceived notions and stereotypes. Challenge the oppressive and misogynistic dynamics. Challenge the racism that it permeates our political system. Challenge why dollars come in heavy and late into political systems and come with unrealistic expectations for grassroots communities and for local organizations to scale up. You're asking people to almost make a vertical escalation in being able to mobilize in the field. And then the last thing we need transparency and communication. So if anything any of us have said to you tonight matters, if it touched you, if you moved, we want to know about it. And we want you to tell your friends about it. And we want you to spark those conversations with folks in your community. Because I'm willing to bet it may not be a John or a Art or a Dolce, but you got some folks in your neighborhood that are fighting for Black, Indigenous people of color, that are fighting for immigrant rights, that are fighting for workers' rights. They need your love too.
And we just know that, with year-round organizing, there was kind of no better time to start than now. And we also know that with especially with non-voters, it's, it takes a lot more time and energy and money to turn out those non-voters, to turn them into frequent voters. And so we knew that we wanted to have multiple touches and conversations with them before actually like running a GOTV program. So we started really, really early, and it's been really exciting. And we had a lot of people in our universe, which our universe is Democrats and unaffiliateds who are registered to vote, but have not voted in the past 10 years. And so that equals out to, so pre-Roe being overturned, our universe was 250,000 people in the state of Kansas. With all the new registers that happened when Roe was overturned, now that our universe is about 430,000. So that's a lot of people that we could be turning out for the next elections.
Wow, that is huge. And can you tell us a little bit, just give us a little window into what that was like having those conversations? What are some of the things you learned from those conversations? What were folks saying?
Yeah, it was very shocking, even from the beginning. Really, as soon as we started talking about the amendment, these non-voters, they aren't in anyone else's universe for campaigns and organizations and whatnot. And so we were really their first political conversation about an upcoming election. And, they were kind of shocked by that. Like, they're not getting any phone calls, text messages, door knocks, anything else, mailers. They're getting most of their politics and news from either Facebook or TV ads, which can be skewed a lot of the times too. So it was really just shocking to see the results immediately. Pretty much as soon as we started our program on the abortion amendment, consistently about 97% of our voters that we've talked to, or non-voters that we had talked to, had committed to vote for the first time and vote no on this amendment. So it was really from the get-go, people were shocked by even finding out that this was coming up on the ballot. It was very low education, kind of, nobody knew this was coming up. Especially kind of just the voters in Kansas. And so having those first conversations was really exciting, and hearing people, really be totally surprised and shocked and devastated that, the Kansas legislature.
Georgia Alliance for Progress, we are the donor table in the state. We are the progressive donor table, which includes individual donors that have been working together since before 2010, when some of them, along with some organizers, started Pro Georgia, the C3 table. A few years later, they organized themselves as donors and started Georgia Alliance for Progress, for which I am the executive director. A year later, they started and incubated the C4 table, and then the candidate recruitment and training table a year after that. And just 2 years ago, we funded and incubated this C4 communications hub. And so next year in 2023, we will be opening the C3 side of the communications hub. And those organizations make up what we consider to be the Georgia infrastructure. These are organizations that exist to support the grassroots movement in the state of Georgia that leads with progressive values. And the way to ensure that those organizations are most effective, most efficient, and really doing the work that their communities need them to do and that they want to do, we organize and anchor those groups around these coalition tables and support them in everything from HR to legal to, of course, funding and other intangible ways like Spoke and Through Talk and other software, legislative accountability software, things of that nature. What we do is we support these organizations in and out of election season, but specifically in election season, we come together, we gather the programs of and the feedback actually of these 100+ partners in our state, and we build a statewide strategy based on what our data and our polling tells us is happening with our electorate. It has always been our plan, but it became even clearer and actually easier for us to promote the plan of expanding the electorate after the beloved Stacey Abrams sort of promoted and used her platform to really bring awareness to the fact that the Democratic Party was only working with a very small portion of the electorate that had been designed to be the decision-making class in our state, which, as we all know, it did not include Black folks, Asian Americans, immigrants, people of other nationalities or other religions. So we wanted to make sure that we really centered those folks who had been marginalized for years, not just to make up for the marginalization, but to bring them into the process. We have to make up for that just vote suppression and sort of disconnection from the Democratic Party in order to pull them into the process. And so we work with folks like Mondale and a number of organizations that Movement Voter Project supports to ensure that the folks who share our values are at the center of the democratic movement in our state.
So yes, very exciting results in Michigan. First trifecta in 40 years. This is like too much detail, but I will say the last trifecta was only 1 year. So I really think it's the first trifecta ever, because it like, you have to go back, I can't remember, to like the 1800s or something, like it doesn't exist. So we won a governor's seat, Secretary of State, Attorney General. We took both the House and State Senate, and we won 2 really important ballot measures protecting voting rights. They're both constitutional ballot measures protecting voting rights and reproductive rights. And we maintained our state Supreme Court majority. So it was a very big election for us, super exciting. What I want to talk about today and what Ken is going to highlight later is what we do with that so that we win in 2024. And so, you know, victory in 2024 requires a number of things from our partners. There are about 30 to 40 partners, depending on the year here in Michigan. And so there's a lot that they're actually doing now. I know people think sometimes like, oh, this is an off year from an election standpoint. But there's a ton of election related, like there's a ton of work that's happening right now that is setting us up to win in 2024. And I will say in 2024, I think you saw on Billy's map earlier, we will have an open Senate seat. So Debbie Stabenow has announced her retirement, and that will be really critical for us in addition to the presidential, of course. And so there are 3 core focuses for groups right now in order to win in 2024: winning a legislative agenda that directly improves people's lives, ballot initiative and candidate preparation, and then improving their capacity and infrastructure. So I'll talk super briefly about these, and then Ken will really drive it home for like, what does it actually look like for an organization? So, you know, for 40 years, Democrats, really for longer, have told voters that the reason that none of the things that we want are possible is because Republicans are in charge. And that is just not an excuse anymore. And we saw for the first time the difference, the really clear difference between having a Republican run legislature and a Democrat one after the MSU mass shooting last week, which you probably heard of. 3 students were murdered, 5 folks were injured. There was a mass shooting a few years ago at a high school north of Detroit where 4 people were killed, and absolutely nothing happened. This year, this week, Democrats have already introduced 11 bills for safe storage, extreme risk protection orders, and universal background checks. And we fully expect that those will move through the House and the Senate quickly and go to the governor's desk and be signed. So there is a clear and obvious difference that elections had and will have on people's lives. That's not the only thing that they are moving forward. They are also in the process of already moving forward anti-discrimination legislation, protecting LGBTQ folks. They appropriated the first state funding for water shutoff prevention, which has been a huge issue around the state, in particular in Detroit, but in other urban centers as well. And there is a massive list of policies that we have been like sitting on for 40 years that we are hopeful that they will drive through. Again, like that is going to take organizing, you know, not like just because we have a trifecta does not mean that everything just sails through. Billy talked earlier about like mansion and cinema. I think we all know everybody's got their mansions, everybody's got their cinemas. And so there's a lot of work to do. for groups to advocate and hold electeds accountable.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Ken Whitaker. I'm the Executive Director of Michigan People's Campaign. We're a statewide organization that's developing a multiracial democracy that truly represents the residents of Michigan and building a base of people that are always ready to take action at any given moment on the issues that are directly impacting their lives. You know, Billy and Jamila said it, in 2023, we have the power to push through a transformative agenda, but we owe that to having a Democratic trifecta in the state for the first time in 40 years, whereas, as Jamila said, the first time ever, really, because the last one was just 1 year. But let's be real, it was the issues that brought people out to vote in droves, not the candidates. People saw their lives reflected on the ballot and they were compelled to vote. We politicize people on issues like reproductive freedom for all, the campaign that my wife ran, term limit reform, that was another ballot initiative, including expanding access to the ballot. But by leading with ballot proposals, training and equipping our canvas teams with the resources and support they needed, and strategically targeting our geographic and demographic universes, we made the difference in key races and flipped districts. Our canvas team wasn't just large, it was highly impactful. For comparison, the Michigan Democratic Party canvassed 290,000 voters, but with the staff of 122 people and a $14 million budget. We canvassed a little more than 208,000 voters, but with less than half of the staff and a fraction of the budget. That is the power of grassroots organizing and leadership development.
Who is on the front line? There's always infrastructure in a community, always. You know, even when you look at the time in terms of an enslavement of Africans in this country, there was always a way to move information in spite of slavery. There was always a way of moving food and resources in spite of slavery, right? And so there's always an infrastructure that exists in the community. It doesn't matter where that community is. The goal is, if you tap into that power base, if you tap into those, we all know the sisters who live down on the side of the street, the old lady live on the side of the street that know everything happening in the neighborhood, right? We know the corner store that you go to, that where you get information, right? Who can tell you where every dead body is, right? We know the folks who, when somebody's in trouble or their house is caught on fire, who is going to show up to provide resources for them. That's the power in our community. And so if we're actually helping to invest in that infrastructure to help build that out, to help coordinate where people are working, you know, the way that we saw, you know, when you're looking at power and political power, I'll say this just quickly, that you're looking at, normally it's either political candidates or political parties. Instead, what we wanted to do is reframe the political landscape. And that fundamentally what you know is that Black Voters Matter became our campaign. Our candidate was power. Was Black power, that instead of being connected to necessarily a particular candidate or a particular party, that for us, it is engaging people in a process of their agency and where their own power, that's what they're exerting, and that's what they're actually utilizing. And so that's why our model, even in this last election cycle, we were able to support over 600 Black-led grassroots groups in the spectrum of which Cliff raised. In Georgia alone, we worked in over 50 counties, that we were very intentional from the beginning around working in the Black Belt, that there had to be a connection of the urban and the rural connection. That there were urban centers that we are in, and so you've got to be there, but you also have folks that have been pushed out of many of these cities and are living in the suburban areas, or even have selected or to live in rural areas or areas that are considered rural areas. So what happens when you're making that connectivity, when you're building out the ecosystem? And so that's what our work is rooted in. That's what the work has been rooted in Georgia, that for us, elections are just not elections in itself. If you're just doing election work, that's very transactional. Our goal is to be transformative. We are trying to transform the entire political landscape in this country. We want to see something different. We believe that people deserve something different. Children don't deserve to be in cages, right? Women don't deserve to be able to have hysterectomies when they're seeking refuge. People don't need to be shot in the back, right? Or killed just because of who they are, their skin color, right? And so fundamentally, our work is really a larger context that supersedes party or political affiliation. This literally is rooted in, how do we center power around people power so that we are literally impacting and shifting and transforming the political landscape. So that's our work.